Under the fading glow of the city's sunset, Emily Barnes tightened her scarf and adjusted the tray of sandwiches she carried every evening to the park bench near Willow Street. She wasn't rich, nor was she trying to be some kind of saint. She just couldn't ignore people who seemed invisible to the rest of the world. One man in particular had caught her attention over the past few months, Mr. Arthur Hill, an old man who always sat on the same bench wearing a worn-out coat and a gentle smile that hid years of silence. He never begged or asked for anything, he just sat there feeding pigeons, sometimes staring at the horizon as if waiting for someone who never came. Emily, who worked as a nurse's assistant at the local hospital, began bringing him food and tea every day after work. At first, he refused politely, saying, "You don't have to trouble yourself, young lady." But she smiled and said, "Then let me share mine. That's no trouble at all." And that's how their strange little friendship began, between a tired woman who gave and a quiet man who had nothing but gratitude left to offer. Over time, they spoke more. He told her bits about his youth, about how he once had a small bookshop that smelled of ink and dreams, how he lost his wife to illness, and how his only son moved away years ago, leaving behind only silence. Emily found herself lingering after sunset just to listen to his stories. They weren't grand or heroic. They were simple, human, and heartbreakingly sincere. She noticed how his hands trembled when he held the cup, how he always smiled through pain, and how loneliness seemed to cling to him like an old shadow. She often wondered why no one came to visit him. Sometimes she thought about her own father, whom she'd lost years ago, and maybe that's why she couldn't walk past him without stopping. It wasn't pity, it was connection. The kind that doesn't need words. Then one evening, as autumn leaves scattered across the ground, she noticed Mr. Hill didn't show up. For 3 days, the bench remained empty. On the 4th day, she walked to the nearby shelter, hoping to find him. A volunteer told her that an old man matching his description had been taken to the hospital. Her heart sank. Without thinking twice, she rushed to the hospital where she worked, asked around, and finally found him lying quietly in a bed near the window. He looked frail but smiled when he saw her. "Ah," he whispered, "I was wondering if my favorite nurse would find me." She sat beside him, holding his cold hands, fighting back tears. He told her the doctors wanted him to stay a few more days. "I've had my time," he said softly, "but I'm grateful you came. You make the world a little less lonely." She began visiting him every day after her shift, bringing him his favorite tea, reading him old books, and even sneaking in cookies when the nurses weren't looking. The other patients would smile, calling them the father and daughter duo. Emily laughed it off, but deep down, she liked the sound of that. In her heart, she had already begun to see him as the father she missed so dearly. One evening, as the sky outside turned orange, he told her something strange. "Emily," he said, "if one day someone comes looking for me, promise me you'll tell them I was happy. That I wasn't alone in the end." She nodded, not understanding fully, but the look in his eyes made her heart ache. 2 weeks later, he was discharged. Emily helped him settle into a small apartment provided by a local charity. She continued visiting him, helping him with groceries, medicine, and sometimes just sitting beside him in silence. It became a routine she looked forward to, a place where she found peace away from the chaos of the world. But everything changed one cold afternoon when she knocked on his door and found it already open. Inside were 2 men in suits and one young man who looked about her age, sharp and impatient. "Who are you?" the younger man demanded. Emily, startled, explained that she was a friend who checked on Mr. Hill regularly. The young man scoffed, saying, "Friend? My grandfather doesn't need strangers meddling in his affairs." Mr. Hill appeared from the other room, his face pale but calm. "David," he said gently, "this young lady is not a stranger. She's the only one who's treated me like family." The young man frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Grandfather, the lawyers are here to finalize the documents. You shouldn't be entertaining people you barely know." Emily felt her stomach twist. The lawyers greeted the old man, speaking in formal tones, and placed papers on the table. Confused, she excused herself to leave, but Mr. Hill reached out and stopped her. "Please stay," he said softly. "I want you here." When the meeting ended, the grandson's expression had shifted from arrogance to frustration. He stormed out, leaving the lawyers behind. Mr. Hill turned to Emily with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he murmured. "He's my grandson. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. Now he's here because of what's left of my estate. But money isn't what matters. People do." Emily sat beside him, speechless. He looked at her, his hands trembling as he took out an envelope. "I asked my lawyer to prepare this weeks ago. It's not much, but it's for you. For all the days you showed me kindness when no one else did." She shook her head. "No, Mr. Hill, I didn't do this for anything." He smiled sadly. "I know. That's why you deserve it." She never opened the envelope that day. She left it on his table, too overwhelmed to take it. But a week later, the hospital called again. Mr. Hill had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Emily cried like she had lost her own father again. When she attended his small funeral, she saw only a few people, no family, no grandson. Just a few nurses and volunteers. As she stood by his grave, the lawyer approached her, holding that same envelope. "He wanted you to have this," he said gently. Hands trembling, she opened it this time. Inside was a simple letter and a set of documents. The letter read, "Dear Emily, you reminded me that love still exists, even in strangers. You gave me back my dignity, my laughter, and a reason to believe again. I leave you my bookstore, the place that once held my dreams. May it hold yours too. With love, Arthur Hill." Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the papers. He had left her his old bookstore, the same one he had told her stories about. She visited it the next day. It was dusty, the windows cracked, the shelves empty. But she felt something alive there, something she couldn't explain. Over the next months, Emily poured her heart into restoring it. She named it Hill and Hart Books, keeping his memory alive. She placed his photograph on the counter, smiling as if watching over her. Slowly, the community began to gather there, students, lonely elders, dreamers, and wanderers. The shop became more than a business, it became a sanctuary of stories and kindness. One evening, as she was closing the store, the bell above the door jingled. A familiar voice said, "You did all this." It was David, the grandson. He looked humbled, his arrogance gone. He stared at his grandfather's picture for a long time before saying softly, "He talked about you. He wrote me a letter too. Said you showed him what real family looks like." Emily's throat tightened. "I just did what anyone would do," she whispered. David shook his head. "No, not anyone. I wasn't there when he needed me. But you were. I wanted to hate you for that, but now I'm just grateful." They stood there in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, David said, "I want to help. Maybe it's time I did something good with what he left behind." Over the next weeks, he helped her expand the bookstore into a small reading center, offering free books to kids and coffee to anyone who couldn't afford it. Together, they built something beautiful out of one man's forgotten dream, a living memory of kindness. Years later, when people asked Emily why she did it all, she would simply smile and say, "Because once, a lonely old man taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything." And every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she would look at his photograph and whisper, "You were never alone, Mr. Hill." Not then, not now. The store thrived, not because of profit, but because of love. It became a place where strangers turned into friends, where lost souls found warmth, and where one woman's compassion had rewritten a man's final chapter into something eternal. And in the quiet hum of the little bookstore, amid pages turning and laughter echoing, the legacy of a lonely old man and a kind young woman lived on, a reminder that kindness never dies, it only changes hands.